Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast with me, Craig Willman. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Davis. Kate is a strategic leadership advisor who works with SME founders and senior leadership teams to help them improve their happiness and productivity. And she's also the founder of Kate Davis and Associates. Kate, thank you ever so much for being with us today.
Craig, it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, well, it's I'm sure we're going to have a fascinating conversation. I've also been looking into to the work that you do, and obviously we've spoken beforehand as well to get a general flavour of things. But something that keeps coming up again and again in your work is the idea of mindset. Obviously, a lot of people value mindset and know that it's a really important thing in leadership and in many lines of work. But how do you go about identifying that somebody's got the wrong mindset and then encouraging them to change that mindset?
It's a really good question. And I think that the first thing to say about mindset is that it impacts absolutely everything in life, whether that is your willingness to go to the gym on a regular basis, or how you lead a team, or how you wake up in the morning, how you view the world and your place in it, and also the habits that we form around mindset are so important to every element of our lives. When I'm speaking to somebody and I can see that there is a problem somewhere along the line, it will show up in a number of different ways. So sometimes it might be that I'm speaking to someone because a problem has been flagged and I'm being brought in to have a conversation around a difficult working relationship, or something where somebody's having to intervene to sort out a conflict or something like that.
Sure.
Alternatively, it can be when I'm speaking to a leader and they've got themselves stuck. Sometimes people will say, well, what's the most common thing that you talk about in terms of the coaching that I do? The word stuck comes up almost all the time, and so does the word overwhelm. And when people find themselves stuck, whether that's in a thought pattern or where they feel powerless to be able to influence, that's often when there is a mindset issue going on.
Right. And
I think it's harder, the more outward power one has, the harder it feels when you feel stuck and therefore powerless, because it feels like you should be able to do this. And that should is a word that keeps coming up. I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. Really understanding what's happening for somebody and what it is that they're telling themselves, because that's essentially what mindset's about. What are you telling yourself? If you keep repeating the same thing, irrespective of what it is, it becomes true. Simon Sinek will often talk about the elephant. If you keep saying, don't think about an elephant, think about an elephant, what's the first thing you're going to think about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever it is that you're telling yourself, if it's unhealthy and it's keeping you stuck, then that's going to be the thing that we're going to be speaking about to start with. And usually there is a mindset issue with almost everybody. Everybody deals with this every day. So it's just really a question of understanding what your sort of internal voice, your inner boss, as I often call it, what is your inner boss telling you, and what is the impact on your life and also on the outside world?
Yeah, and do you think part of the issue is with a leader, there may be an element of pride in that if they feel stuck or they feel a bit powerless, who do they talk to about that? Who they turn around to their colleagues who are meant to be taking their direction from them and show that vulnerability to them. That's something a lot of leaders might be very, very reluctant to do.
Absolutely, and again, it's something I talk about quite a lot with clients. It's this idea of the sort of the CEOs feeling squeezed, and they can feel squeezed in a number of different ways. But certainly, as far as the squeeze that they put on themselves, there is that they will expect that they would be able to manage this, to lead this, because they've got to that level of seniority. Whether they have founded the business, often that's the most difficult part. If they've founded the business, this is their baby, and this is something that they're very passionate about. And getting to a position of leadership actually usually means stepping back from doing the thing that they love and somehow being expected to know all the answers to all the questions.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the answers to all the questions, do we? There's a lovely adage, I'm sure I saw it on a mug somewhere, about everybody's winging it, and anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. Yeah. We're all winging it to a certain extent, aren't we? But by the time you get to a senior position, there is an expectation that you must know what you're doing. And often that's when things like imposter syndrome can creep in, where that feeling of what happens if everybody finds out that I'm winging it? What happens if everybody realises that I'm a fraud?
Yeah,
which is obviously a complete nonsense, but it's something we tell ourselves as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was expecting the word imposter syndrome to come up there. Yeah, I think you know part of the way to get out of imposter syndrome is by realising that pretty much everybody has it to some extent, and you know all you can do is, once you keep proving to yourself again and again that you can do a certain thing, then at some point you've got to let yourself off the hook. But I guess the element of the fun side or the challenging side of life is that once you've proven you can do one thing, you'll find that you'll be doing something else that you're not so sure about, and on it goes. So you never feel quite safe. But then I guess we'd probably be bored if we did just do the same thing again and again. So yeah, you can't really win either way.
No, you can't. But you're absolutely right that every time you try something new, and we need to try new things, we need to be able to change and grow. Every time you do something new, every time you're stepping outside of your personal comfort zone, or if you're taking other people outside of theirs, that voice is still going to come back in again. Those nagging doubts, where your brain's just trying to keep you safe. But that does mean that progression and innovation can be hampered as a result of that, which then, of course, then leads to sort of much more stagnant leadership, which is no good either. Yeah. But failing forward is always the right way to go about this. I always think if you don't try, you can't succeed, can you?
No, absolutely. Yeah, you learn from your failures, and that's how you find out what isn't working. Yeah. And yeah, it comes up again and again in leadership advice that the people who achieve the most successes are the ones who also have had the most failures because they've tried the most amount of times. Yeah. So you mentioned a few times about negative thoughts or recurring thoughts. Are there any techniques or exercises that you encourage for your clients who are struggling with those things?
So you've made a very good point as far as imposter syndrome is concerned. Yeah. Definitely that giving yourself the evidence, because your brain is trying to give you evidence of the reasons why you shouldn't do something or why you're not qualified to do something. So actually giving that inner boss the evidence that actually that's not true and that you can do this, and then effectively saying, look, shut up, back in your box. I'm going to go and do this. Yeah. The best way to prove your imposter syndrome is by going and doing it. But one of the things that I feel very passionately about, and I work with my clients a lot, is actually being able to find their own zone of genius. Okay. Because if you are working within your own strengths, if you are really working at the very best of your ability, we all have different strengths and we all have different challenges. But understanding where the strengths are and playing to those as much as you possibly can will mean that you're much less likely to fail anyway, because you're doing the thing that you're naturally gifted at. And it also means that you're less likely to be coming across those I'm not qualified, I'm not able to do this, or the comparisonitis, which always sounds like an itchy skin rash, doesn't it? That constant looking around at your peers to see what are they doing, and they're doing better than me, and how are they doing better than me? I must be doing something wrong. And I think this is what we were sort of alluding to before. The other difficulty that leaders will have is that there are very few, or they can sometimes feel that there are very few people who understand them and understand what's going on, and where is their sounding board, where is the sense check from their perspective. That means that they can have those conversations about how they're feeling, or the fact that they don't have the answer to everything, or that the fact that they're comparing themselves to other people. And this is again where that squeeze comes in. Feeling that pressure of needing to have all the answers whilst doubting yourself, because we all do. It's part of human nature to doubt ourselves. As I say, that self-sabotage is a protection mechanism. But being able to really lean into those strengths, understanding what you're naturally good at, and also therefore knowing what it's like to be on the other side of you. If you understand what you are, who you are, and what you're like, understanding what the other side of that is can be incredibly important. Yeah. And it also means that you get to recognize the same thing in other people, which therefore means that other people, the people in your team, the people who work for you, are able to be productive. And if they're productive and they're doing the stuff that energizes them, and then they're going to be happier as a result. And so being able to really hone in on who you are and what your real gifts are helps so much with so many of these areas, whether it is the nagging doubt in your head, or whether that's the much more tangible, deliverable productivity of teams. All comes down to doing the thing that makes you happy. I mean, this is one of my taglines. I have a mug with it on. I'm so obsessed with this. But the stuff that makes you happy is the stuff that you're good at. And the more you can do the stuff that you're good at, the better you're going to be. And that's the same for a CEO or the lady cleaning the loos. It doesn't matter what it is, who that is. If we're working at our best, we're going to be more productive. We're going to be happier. We're going to have less self-doubt. Which can only be a good thing.
Yes, and does that mean if it's for a leader, and if we're trying to keep them within their zone of genius as much as possible, does that mean finding colleagues who can take on some of their responsibilities that they don't think they do so well?
Yes, and it's not necessarily. I don't want to do any of the stuff that I don't like, because that's also not good leadership. That's not being a good human being either. It's being able to sit in that zone of genius, sitting in your strengths 70-80% of the time. Some days you will have to do it 30% of the time. Yeah. But you'll struggle by the end of the day. Those are the days where you come home and you're thinking, God, I'm so tired. What's been going on? You've been doing the other side of your strengths. But looking much more holistically at everybody's strengths, whether that's starting with the top. I do think it's important to start from the top. I've worked in change management for long enough to realise that if the people at the top don't believe in the change, nothing's going to change. So looking at the leadership level and below, that doesn't mean that you stop at the leadership level. Any change in any organisation has to go all the way through. But that's a whole other subject. Being able to look holistically at the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and it's often not you're in the wrong job. It's just it's a shift of parameters. And even if you're looking at things on a project by project basis, who is best able to do this? Not just from a capacity point of view, but actually, where is which team member has this in their sweet spot? Why wouldn't you want to utilise those strengths? So yes, it can be a question of delegation of some duties or responsibilities, but it's much better if you're looking at it as a much more holistic framework.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. You mentioned CEO squeeze a couple of times now. Is that something you think has been heightened lately in the post-pandemic era?
Very much so, and I feel very very much for those people in those positions, because not only, as we said, you've got your inner boss asking you all of those questions, but if you think about the number of stakeholders, internal and external, in any organisation, Everybody post-pandemic is looking for answers. No one's got the answers because we're all navigating a completely new landscape, trying to work out what we can bring with us, what we need to completely rethink. The economic, political, all of the landscapes are shifting wherever we look.
Sure.
So your employees are looking to you for a different set of reward schemes and training and development, all of those different things, whether that's hybrid working or whether that's simply salary increases. Or I want to work from home because I've got a puppy now. A couple of times that's come up. They have different demands of you, and they have different requests of you, and they're looking for different answers. Your shareholders will have different requests than they had 2 or 3 years ago. Your suppliers are now having to deal with again a completely different landscape. And just think of the shortages that people are having to deal with, and the additional bureaucracy post-Brexit, and all of the different stakeholders that any leader is managing are all seeking answers, and they're often coming into the same person or the same small group of people who, as I said before, don't have the answers either. And I see this so often where the person I say at the top, I see them very much in the middle. They're in the middle and they're being squeezed from all sides. And this is a conversation that you and I have had, isn't it? That where do they go? Where do they go to for a sounding board? Where do they go to for help? Where do they go to for the answers? Yes. Or even if it's somewhere where they can just explore what other people are doing, how other people are doing it. Could that work for my organisation? It can be, it's a very common phrase, but it's tough at the top. It's very lonely at the top. And when you're being squeezed from all sides, it makes it an awful lot harder.
It certainly does, yeah. And that's something we found at the Leaders Council since the lockdown measures have eased. We've done a regular coffee morning once a month just to get the leaders, for the various members that we have together. They're all directors or CEOs or head teachers or leadership positions of some sort. But there's no agenda to it at all. We didn't really know what to expect to begin with, but it has almost become like an informal support group, if you like, and you can just see the relief of leaders being in a room with other people who are going through similar things, even if it's in completely different fields. The pressures are intense now, and as you say, that a lot of the challenges are brand new, and the cost of living crisis and everything else, it just piles up. And I think if you are a leader in a lonely position, as you say, it's good to have other people in similar roles that you can speak to. And I noticed as well that that's a key part of your work is about self-care and about encouraging the leader to look after themselves before being able to look after the team.
Very much so. Again, I mean, I'm full of the old adages today, aren't I? You can't pour from an empty jug. If you're not looking after yourself, if you are not able to perform at your best, you can't expect anybody else to be doing the same thing. And I see this. I see this a lot. It's something that comes up with women a lot. Particularly women with children, where they are being pulled in all directions, and they don't put themselves, sometimes not even on the list, let alone near the top of the list. Right. I see it also with leaders of any gender, that feeling of needing to nurture people and needing to put other people first. It can feel very selfish to put oneself first. Yeah. And reframing that to essentially be saying, well, what would happen if you keeled over, or if you weren't here, or if you're not performing at your best? What does that do for the rest of the team? Yeah. Self-care is not selfish. Self-care is probably the best thing that you can do for any. I'm going to use the word team here because I do mean team, organisation, family unit, friendship unit, anything. If you can't lead yourself first, then you cannot lead anybody else either. And you need to be able to understand yourself and your drivers, and being able to see the triggers of I'm becoming overwhelmed, I'm becoming burnt out, I'm not looking after myself. How am I going to effectively recharge? Being able to see those triggers in yourself will actually just put the brakes on something that could go very haywire very quickly. So self-care is absolutely paramount.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tricky one because, as we discussed earlier, there are thoughts that you perhaps have to ignore or push away. Thoughts telling you that you're not good enough at this, or you're going to fail, or all these negative thoughts. But at the same time, there might be other thoughts that are saying, "Oh, you should really take a break now," or maybe sit this project out, or calm down. And it may be tempting for the leader to also push those thoughts away and power on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
I was going to say the word "should" has come up quite a few times there, which I just wanted to pick up on, if I may.
Sure.
I think this is something that we live with an awful lot, and I'm not suggesting for a second that again we should ditch our responsibilities, but it's a word that I like people to almost sort of count how often they hear it in themselves.
Okay.
If the answer is, well, I should do this, or I should do that, it probably means that something is going wrong somewhere, because should is a very heavy word. There is an expectation level there, and almost an expectation of failure. Well, I should do that. I should go to the gym. If you ever hear yourself saying that, you're not putting your trainers on. If you should be doing something, the chances are that it's either the wrong thing, or it's something that you don't have the energy for, or you don't believe in. Right. And this is again, I mean, almost back to the zone of genius, understanding what feels like an ought or a should, which tends to be outside influences, outside impact on you, outside expectations, as opposed to the things that you, from an individual perspective, are your natural strengths, but also from an organization's perspective.
Yeah.
The leader defines the culture. If an organization feels itself going down a path of oughts and shoulds, it's probably not sitting and playing to its strengths. It's probably not using its USP. It's not performing in the way that it could. It's performing in the way that people think it should, and that's not ever going to be the best course for any kind of growth or any longevity.
And so is the key to replace oughts and shoulds with wants? Is that the idea? Things that people want to do?
Well, the word "want" can sometimes feel a little bit flippant. The toddler of "I want this" and "I want that," and this is what I'm. It's not a question of completely ignoring all of your responsibilities, all of those stakeholders, and actually managing all of those people, but by staying true to, I mean, we're almost sort of going into mission and vision and values, aren't we here? So looking at the purpose of the organization, right. What's the driver behind the organization? Why do you all get out of bed in the morning? What's the vision? What's the vision that you've set for the business? And what are the values that underpin all of those? If you can stay true to those, that's what the shareholders bought into. That's what the employees bought into when they came to work for you. And when we're looking at that CEO squeeze and people being pushed in different directions, it's very easy to come off course. Using things like mission and vision and values, being, almost using that, your mission as your North Star, it will be working within your strengths, because it's what the business was founded for in the first place. Keeping on your path, yeah, will mean that you'll waste a lot less time, money, resources, etc., deviating and trying to please sort of outside stakeholders.
Yeah, and then that brings it back to the self-care, because if you're not looking after yourselves, if you're tired, if you're not, if you're not able to perform as well as you could, then your mission is going to fail.
Yes, exactly that. And that self-care is individual self-care, but also the responsibility for actually the self-care of the organisation as well. Who is looking after the organisation as a whole? Who is looking after the people, the culture, the values that the organisation was founded on? Self-care works for a group of people as well as it does for one.
Yes, and also if you want to be able to look after yourself, it will help if you've encouraged your colleagues to do the same. If you're constantly pushing them to their absolute limits, then maybe they're not going to look too sympathetically at you if you're trying to take a day to yourself to recover. But if you've encouraged them to look after themselves, then they will want you to do the same.
Exactly. Yes. You can't be pushing them to do it and then saying, "See you later, I'm off to the golf course." That doesn't go down very well, does it?
No, absolutely not. So slightly conscious of time, Kate, but I'll just get into an interesting part of your philosophy, which is the idea that there's a leader in everyone, and that everybody has a leadership voice. So could you briefly tell us about your 5 voices system?
Yes, so I work with a methodology called the 5 voices, which is in essence it is a personality profiling resource. But what I really love about it is being able to understand not only your own voice, but also being able to recognise the voices in others, being able to see. If you can recognise your own voice, you can also hear what it's like to be on the other side of you, to see what it's like for other people.
Okay.
And it works on the basis that we are all of the 5 voices. It depends on which order that they come in as to how that shows up. The 5 voices in quietest to loudest are the nurturer. So the nurturer is the champion of people and relational harmony. They are team mum almost, okay. Without wishing to add a gender to it, because it's not gender specific, but that nurturing, always thinking about how are people going to be affected by this, not wishing to kind of run off down a path of change without looking at the impact on other people.
Sure.
They tend to be the quietest of the voices. They tend to be the people who will take criticism most keenly, and they will fight for everybody else's highest good and never their own. They make up an astonishing 43% of the population. 43% of the population are in the quieter camp. Right. We then look at the guardian voice. In terms of loudness, we then go to the creative voice. So the creative is almost the opposite, still very people focused, but very much into the future. Those incredibly innovative, visionary thinkers, all about organizational integrity, very values driven, but can sometimes be so into the future that those present voices really struggle to hear them. Okay. They are the people where if you're sitting around a board table and somebody comes up with this absolute gem of an idea, and then you think, I've no idea what it sounded good, but I've no idea what that means. That's probably the creative voice. The third voice is the guardian. So they are the champion of due diligence. They are the people with all the questions. Well, that sounds an interesting idea, but I have many, many, many questions. Yeah. And those 3 groups of people make up 82% of the population. And those are other three that are least likely to be represented in senior leadership. Okay. Because either we can't hear you, we don't understand you, or sometimes, especially with a guardian voice, we might not want to might not want to listen, because you're probably asking the difficult questions, which are incredibly important to ask. The fourth of the voices is the connector. So the connector is all about relational networks. Connectors know exactly who to put you in touch with, which resource is required. Incredibly good communicators, often very charismatic. the pioneer is the loudest of the voices. That can be in terms of volume, but also in terms of force as well. And those two, as I say, hugely overrepresented in leadership positions because both very future focused. One very, very systematic, very, very foundational, structured military precision with the pioneer, and the connector being that master communicator. But often those people in the other three categories will say, "Well, I'm not cut out for leadership."
Yeah,
which is a nonsense. Anyone is capable of leadership. Any one of those voices is, and being able to recognise the strengths of each of those five voices is incredibly important. It's really important to be able to have representation from each of the five voices in any team, because each of them brings something different to the table. But as I said before, the leader defines the culture. If you are a nurturer and probably doubting your own self-worth to a large extent, you're probably not putting yourself forward for that. What are we missing out on as an organisation because you don't want to put yourself forward? That guardian voice of really honouring the past, bringing it into the present, being very structured, being very sometimes risk averse, but actually creating enormous strength, especially when we're going into turbulent times. We've been in turbulent times for years. Actually, that guardian voice is so important to be able to be the steadier of the ship. That voice may not think that they are capable of leadership, or they may not think that people would want them to step into that because they ask the difficult questions, but that's where the growth comes. And so when I speak to leaders and I do this work with them and I help them to understand who they really are, and that they shouldn't have to, and there's that word should again, they are able to use their own strengths rather than pushing into what they think people want of them. The nurturers who are sort of trying to almost be pioneers, who are trying to be a different person because they think that's what people expect of them. Where actually by being themselves, the organisation will get far more benefit out of that.
Right, so it's fighting against the idea that there's a off the peg vision of what a leader is, and certain characteristics that you have to have. Yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. No two organisations are the same. So why would two leaders be the same? Yeah.
If you think about the sort of the pioneer voice, which is supposed to be the very strong visionary leader, very able to make the clinical decisions, able to separate the person from the fact. They will make much better leaders. You look at somebody like Barack Obama. He's not like that. He's much more values driven. He's much more people focused, and would be much more able to absorb what people need rather than what the piece of paper tells you to do.
Right.
And great those great leaders who we all think of when you think of a great leader, whether that's the Nelson Mandelas or, as I said, the Barack Obamas, or those are often the people who are not the typical leader in terms of their personality DNA. They're working with their left hand and their right hand. They're working with their strengths as well as being able to lean into the areas that they have learned. Yeah. And being able to do that, having that flexibility is so important in leadership.
Sure. And so qualities such as, you mentioned Mandela and Obama there, so qualities such as charisma and confident speaking, those wouldn't put you into one of these five categories. They could be present in any of the categories. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And confidence, if you boil it down, confidence is simply a question of it's being comfortable in your own skin, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're comfortable in your own skin, it doesn't really matter who you are. That's what you're going to project. When you're feeling when you have that lack of confidence or that lack of self-worth, it's usually where you are pretending, where you've got where you've put on the mask. That's where the lack of confidence comes from. So if you're able to work within your own natural strengths, whether you're able to work at your personal best, that will make you more confident. It will make you a better orator, a better communicator. All of those things come much more easily when you're not pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah, no, that really rings true. Yeah, I think a problem people might run into is that they have the certain leaders that they admire, and then they will try and emulate that leader, even though the personality of that leader might be entirely different to their own. And yeah, as you say, really, they should put their own personality first and be comfortable with that, and then things like confidence will come naturally as a result of that. Is that the general idea?
Absolutely. And you think about the people that you admire, irrespective of their job status. The people you admire are the people who are happier in their own skin, who have that confidence, who have that self-belief. And being able to do that, it doesn't stop you admiring other people, but it actually means that you're able to more drill down on what it is you admire about them. And then you can borrow some of that, absolutely. But that confidence has got to come from you rather than a cloak you're putting on, a persona that you're putting on. If it comes from you, you can then borrow the good bits from other people and take inspiration from those people, absolutely. But you've got to lead yourself first.
Yeah, and I think that potentially brings us back to where we started, which was failure and making peace with failure. Because I think confidence certainly comes from being comfortable with things going wrong, knowing that it's not always going to be perfect, and yeah, when you've messed things up hundreds of times, then the idea of messing up a public speaking arrangement or a project not working perfectly, those things are much less scary than they used to be. And you might seem confident to the outside world, but often it's just because you're okay with things not being perfect always.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that veneer of confidence. You may fool some of the people some of the time, but it'll crack, and you as the individual will be the first person to spot it, and other people see it pretty quickly afterwards as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it will make it means that if it's false, then it means that the moment you have the failure, the failure is so much harder to take, and the fall is so much bigger.
Yes, very much so.
Great. Well, look, Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Where's the
Thank you, and you.
Yeah. Well, where's the best place for people to go if they'd like to find out more about the work that you do?
I'd love people to come and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Kate Davis, or my website is katedavis.net.
Okay, great, and we'll include that in the description of the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for listening. And we'll be back shortly with another episode of the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you.